All right, everyone. Welcome once again to the Faces of Business. I am your host, Damon Pistolka, and I am so excited for our guest today because we have none other than Richard Parker today from Roy Street and Diomo. Did I say that
Yeah,
right?
Diomo. Yeah, Diomo. Yes.
Diomo. Richard, so excited to talk to you today. I can't hardly speak because you are an M&A legend. You've been in this for a couple days,
Yes. Only a couple days.
it's going to be fun for us to talk about this because we're going to dispel the myths about buying a business the right way, man, and it's going to be fun. So, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. Those are great words. I was laughing, guys. I saw a post online on LinkedIn not long ago, and this fellow had written a very nice comment about me, and he marked, and I hadn't met him, and he said, Richard Parker, the OG of M&A. I thought it meant old guy, right? It shows you what the hell I know. And I said, so I reached out to him. I said, what's with this? Like, what's with the old guy? He said, no, it's the original gangster. I said, okay,
Yeah.
got it. I figured, okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much. So
Yep.
I've been doing this a long time. Yes.
Yeah. But it's awesome, and we'll get into this. When we talk about buying a business the right way, and you really have helped a lot of people do this. Of course, you've been buying and selling businesses a long time. But let's first of all, we want to go into the Wayback Machine. We're going to go back and go, and kind of understand from you, Richard, how you got into what you're doing today. I mean, because that's always an interesting story for us to hear.
Well, I hope I don't bore your listeners. I got into this because I really didn't have a choice. And let me explain to you what happened. I was working for a company. I grew up in Canada. I was living in Canada. I was 29 years old. I was a vice president of a company that was growing by leaps and bounds. Like, I probably shouldn't even been a vice president at that time, but the company was just growing so fast in the consumer products and sporting goods, consumer products mainly. And so hiring people, they just couldn't hire them fast enough. So I moved up the ranks really fast. And a lot of it sort of probably over my head in certain things, but I was working like a maniac and learning as much as I could as I went along. And then I was making $72,000 a year, which was quite good at that point in time. We're talking 35 years ago, 34 years ago. And then I did the brilliant thing of blowing $60,000 in the stock market, buying stock on margin, which was, when I heard how you buy stock on margin, the person who was explaining it to me, and I put no blame on them. He said, you put up half the money, you basically buy half the stock. And when it goes up, you just pay back the difference. And the question I should have asked at that point is, what happens when it goes down? And boy, did it go down. And my first child was on the way. I have now 4 children and 1 grandson. And I was in a terrible financial situation, and I really couldn't move. I loved where I was working, so I couldn't really move to another company to make more money because I was already overpaid as it was. So it was like moving somewhere else wasn't going to happen. And as I thought about it, and I didn't think long about it, I said, I've got to put myself in a position where I don't have a ceiling on my income.
Yeah.
That's my only option to get out of this mess, and recognize very quickly that starting a business was out of the question, because God knows how long that takes to get going. And so it seemed very clear to me, it was, I've got to buy an existing business where I can generate an income, replace an income, and generate an income, and have an opportunity to grow and not have a limit on my upside. And so my decision was really based on the fact that I had no options. And, when you have no options, it's very easy to make decisions.
Yeah.
And so, I rolled the dice. I invested. I started a company first for a very, very short period of time, and then recognized that if I want to grow this thing, I'm talking very quickly, like after a couple of months, there was a competitive company that was available for sale, small one, and I acquired them. So my whole entry was for at that point, about $30,000. Which today's dollars, I was just calculating recently, is about 75 grand. So I got into it for a reasonable amount of money. I leveraged a lot of seller financing, and that started my journey, and a lot of things along the way. And here we are 3 decades later, and I've bought 14 companies, which includes 1 co-invest, and the deal sizes are all over the place, like, 50 grand to a little over 200 million, 208 million. And just been in this world. I know everyone calls it M&A. I'm pretty simple. I call it buying and selling businesses. And that's what I've been doing for decades, and have more fun every day than I did yesterday. It's pretty crazy.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So as you so you had these other companies that you bought at the beginning. When did you decide I want to start buying and selling companies as a business or as a way to make money?
I never really thought about doing that to make money, because my goal always in going into the business is I just want to work this thing and build it up and see what the hell
Okay.
happens, right? I mean, it was never like this flipper idea at all. I mean,
Yeah.
I never thought about that. Always went into it just, I want to grow this thing and see what happens, and focus on building something pretty nice. And I started getting, I guess, a bit of a reputation because I was a young guy and around my hometown for buying and selling businesses. So a number of people were coming to me, and I was dispensing some advice. I was never charging anyone. But I
Yeah.
didn't realize I was doing like investment banking, but I just wasn't getting paid for it.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed that. And then I had the rights for Sega Video for Eastern Canada, and that exploded my business. And I ended up selling my business, most of them in 1996, and relocated to Florida. There was my 3 kids at that point, and I figured, I was contemplating moving to Toronto, contemplating moving to Burlington, Ontario, Vermont, which is right near Montreal, which is a beautiful little college town. I liked it, and I'm a big hockey guy, and there's good college hockey there. Or go to Florida. And I said, you know what, I had enough of this cold weather, and
Yeah.
decided to relocate to Florida. And it was an easy move because my kids were young at the time. And then I looked at an acquisition down here, which I decided to walk away from, which became the genesis for the course that I ultimately wrote. And that led into a lot of representation, buy side and sell side representation for a number of years, and in countless transactions. And again, which was really nice on both sides of the table. And parallel to that, I made a couple other acquisitions, which I've always enjoyed. Sometimes when the market dropped in 2008, 2009, I bought a couple of companies. And subsequently, a few years later as well. I can't help myself. I can't. And that's part of the problem. Although I've curtailed it a little bit in the last couple of years because I'm starting to chill out a little bit on the on the heavy duty acquisition mode. So, but yeah, just when I think about it going through the years, I don't know if there was really a specific plan to get into this and start doing it, for financial reasons. I just really love the whole space of
Yeah.
buying, building, selling, helping people do the same thing. That's certainly the most rewarding part of what I've done. And here I am, all kinds of time later and years later, and it's to me, I don't look at it like a job. I enjoy every deal. You do a lot of this. You work with a lot of companies. Like every deal is different. And when I tell people, yeah, yes, I do know what I'm talking about when it comes to buying and selling business, but I learn something new in every deal. It still astounds me no matter what. And I find you have to be on your A game. And if you're intellectually curious, and I'm not intellectual, but I'm intellectually curious and like learning and enjoy the learning about a new business and getting immersed in it, something I didn't even know existed the day before. I just find the whole universe really just loads of fun.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And you can hear it in your voice. And that's why I think you and I connected so quickly and so deeply is that you can tell you're into it. And
I'm
I get
into it.
into it too. I
Yeah.
start talking about it and people just go, you really like this, don't you? And it's like, well, if you have not been around when you successfully buy or sell a company, I mean, it's one of those things that you don't forget.
That's a very good observation. You definitely do not forget it. It's the process can be difficult. There's peaks and valleys and pivots and things that come out. With things that it's what you never planned for that comes to bite you out in the rear end, or things you didn't expect, and you're dealing with people and personalities, and machinery is much more reliable than human beings. And so you got the whole buffet, right?
Yeah.
You got ego, you got personalities, you got money, you got people's emotional ties to their business. I mean, it's the whole buffet of emotions, and for me, it's navigating your way through is really a lot of fun. It's really interesting.
Yes, yes, it is. And I agree. And, we've recently in the past couple of years, as we have clients that want to growing by acquisition has been one of our focuses in helping our clients do that. And Wow, I'm telling you, when you're doing both sides of that, not necessarily in the same company, but when you're buying companies and then you're selling them, it really does help to hone your skills, because you're looking at the deals much differently than if I'm a sell side only or a buy side only representative throughout the year. You just don't really get that perspective like you have from
Right.
working both sides of those deals.
Yeah, it's been very helpful, and and, and I did the buy side for so many years and have so much material written um, on the buy side that when I work with a seller, it's important that they understand if you're going to go through this process, because it's not all easy. If you're going to go through this process, you really need to understand this through the lens of a buyer
Yes.
and understanding, things that you deem as a seller to not be, they're not that important in my business, or nothing, nothing to worry about. Those little issues and concerns, those are, multiplied to the power of 10 in the eyes
Yeah.
of the buyer, right? And the
Yeah.
words I always use is like, what you think are incidents to them are catastrophes. And
Yes.
so, those type of things, understanding it for the buyers, and also understanding that the you've got an emotional tie to the business. What you think your business, the value that your business is worth, has nothing to do with the value. And another big part of it, which I think being on the buy side for so many years, I'm able to convey, and I do always work with a handful of sellers, is regardless of the deal terms, the buyer takes the biggest part of the risk in these deals. And so this philosophy of win-win, it sounds great, but it's complete nonsense. I mean, the buyer has to win and the seller has to be reasonably happy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean win-lose, but it's reasonably happy and understand. So that my exposure on the buy side has been incredibly valuable. And likewise for your clients, I know that having the ability, when you run a business, an operating business, that alone, and people are growing their businesses through acquisition because organic growth is much more difficult. But if you're operating a business, that generally is going to make you a better business buyer, because you have a different way of looking at it. The reality of what's
Hmm.
involved. There's a certain things that you're able to look at, and especially if it's a complementary business, you could look at it, with a wealth of experience, even if you haven't been operating your business that long. So
Yes.
it's you become a better buyer. The more you do, the better you become.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. So as you're helping people do this and you're going along, you decide to create a course for business buyers. What was the genesis of deciding to create that course? I mean, because yeah, you were getting the experience and stuff, but what really kicked it off is like, maybe I should create a course to help business buyers.
I remember it like it was yesterday. Actually, it feels
Awesome.
like yesterday, but I remember it like it was yesterday. And I get asked this question quite a bit. I was looking at a deal to buy a company in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, that was in the commercial laundry business, machines, washers, dryers. They were doing parts, repairs, service, but also selling to laundromats, dormitories, condominiums, those where you pay for use, etc. And it was a brand name, it was Maytag, a very well-known name. And this group
Hmm.
had the southeastern Florida rights to this product. And they also had separate companies. They had one company that owned some of the machines themselves. They had another company that rented. They had another that did the parts. And I started looking at this deal to negotiate a pretty good deal and long seller note, and started doing my due diligence. And I'm not saying that they were doing anything fraudulent. It was just, there was so much commingling. Like they
Oh
were,
yeah.
the money was being collected from one company. If he was short in another company, you just paid checks through one company that didn't have expenses related to that company. The employees of one company were getting paid by another. And so when I started looking at the financials, I mean, this whole thing was like a plate of spaghetti. And
Yeah.
the description that I used all the time is I recognized, what, I'm never going to figure out how to figure out this thing. I'm just never going to be able to do it. It was just all over the place. And so I told the owner that I was, rescinding the offer. He wasn't very happy. But I felt very comfortable with my decision. And I remember like it was yesterday, standing outside the place in just off of Broward Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale, which is one of the main streets in Fort Lauderdale. And they were just a little north of there. And I stood outside in their parking lot because I'm doing that piece I was actually looking at the inventory that day. And I remember standing in the parking lot and I said to myself, this is verbatim. I said, the average schmuck would have bought that business. And I said, I'm not that smart, but I've been doing this a long time. And I know that I'm glad I was able to, just from know-how and experience, walk away. But the average schmuck would have bought that business. And it really, bing, like a light went on in my head, because I started thinking about, like, what does the average person do? I'm not talking about PE firms or institutional
Yeah,
buyers that
yeah,
have gobs of money and tons of talent. I'm talking about the average person who wants to improve their lifestyle and buy a business. And I said, what do they do? Like, what's available? And this was 20 something years ago. So the internet was really in it. It was early on. I mean, it was available, it was early on. And financially, I wasn't operating with any gun to my head. I was in good shape. And I became so intrigued with this that I took a year off and devoted myself to researching the whole landscape. And I talked with hundreds of business owners, prospective business buyers, people who tried to buy businesses that couldn't, business brokers, accountants, attorneys, like the whole universe of who's involved in the buying and selling of businesses. And what I realized was there's nothing really to help individuals buy businesses. I mean, there were some books, a smattering of books, and those were not in any detail. There were some very high level books for, like, Harvard MBAs.
yeah,
But for the average person who wants to buy a business, Main Street or above, smaller business, there was
yeah,
nothing available. And then I started learning some of the stats in the business, like, over 90% of people begin the search to buy a business, never complete a transaction. And that number's only gotten worse.
yeah,
There's no stakeholders that are helpful to buyers. Business brokers, they have their role. I mean, you do business brokerage. I do business brokerage or investment bank, whatever you want to call it. So anything I say disparaging is disparaging our own trades. But
yeah,
business brokers don't help buyers. I mean, their goal is to sell you a business. There are some good-hearted, well-meaning business brokers, but by and large, if they don't sell you a business, they don't eat. And
yeah,
they're not going to dispense unbiased advice to you. And so and in speaking to a lot of people that bought businesses and really went through a hard time, or people who tried to buy and didn't complete a
yeah,
transaction, there was the informational part, there was the navigation part, all the moving parts of this, but there was also the piece where they said, the common thing was I had nobody to hold my hand. Like, I needed someone to guide me and through this process. And so I had kept incredible notes on all the deals that I looked at over the years. And I said, I'm going to put this into a manual going to that's going to explain to people what they need to know,
mm-hmm,
what they need to do, and how to do it for
yeah,
every single step in the process. So know this, and then if this happens, you do that, and if that happens, do this, and here's the outcome you can expect to achieve for every single step in the process. And most importantly, because I love this world so much, I said, I'm going to make myself available. I'm not going to charge people. They can call me and email me anytime with any questions related to buying a business, because I really wanted to get into the help business. I was I was so grateful for what I'd been able to achieve. And I like this space so much that I said,
yeah,
I never put making money into the equation. Like, I never even thought this would become a business. That's what's crazy about all of this. You know,
I
and I've
love it.
told this story 100 times. My wife asked me the night before we launched, how many do you think you're going to sell? And I put them all together. I printed them up, put in 3-year binders. How many are you going to sell? I said, really, if I sell one and I help one person buy the right business or avoid buying the wrong one, good enough for me. I really will be pleased with that. And here we are all these years later with countless rewrites and 100,000 plus copies is sold. It's just ridiculous. Like, I
Yeah,
never thought this was going to be. I still shake my head sometimes that I can't believe this turned into a serious business. It's
yeah,
wild. It's absolutely wild. We've helped so many people. I bought a lot of businesses and had a lot of fun things going in my life, but like, from a gratification standpoint, this is the greatest.
yeah, yeah. That's awesome. And it's awesome to hear. I mean, a couple of things. This is back up a little bit, because I want people that may have started a little later on in the show, go back to the beginning and start from there, because Richard, you've been doing this a while, helping you buying your own businesses, and now you've been helping people buy businesses and sell businesses for a long time. But you, me, everybody that's in the space of buying or selling businesses gets contacted by a bazillion business buyers
Yeah.
every week, every month, every year.
Yeah.
And you just said something right here. 90% of the people that want to buy will not buy. And I think you might be generous there. And I think it's probably actually higher than
It's
that,
higher. It is higher now. Yeah.
because there are so many people that are trying to do this, and they just come at it unprepared. and I said this before we got on, I will say it again. You need to go to your, if someone's listening here, go to your website, get your course, your book, get it and study it, because for the money you charge for this, it is well worth it for anyone that's considering to buy a business to do this, because knowledge is power in this, and this is not something you're going to do. It's not buying a house, it's not buying a car, it's not buying a washer or dryer. It is way different, and there is a lot more to consider. And as you said, if I am that business buyer, I am taking way more risk than the seller, and that is so key. And so many sellers lose track of this.
Yep.
Because they're sitting there with that business. They may have had it 20 years. It may have been, long time ago, paid off all their house and all their loans. And they're just running this thing on cash, taking cash out of it like it's a piggy bank. That buyer coming in, they're going to have to invest money in that, even if it's money out of pocket, a loan, whatever. But there's cash that they have to pay back if they do that. And there's consequences if it doesn't pan out long term for them. So it is the risk as the buyer. So those sellers really need to understand that perspective, like you said earlier, because, and I go back to my notes, it was great. You said they buyers are the ones that should win, and sellers should be reasonably happy.
Exactly.
Because the buyers are taking all the risk. And I think that is it. And far too many times, I think buyers overlook things and find out far too far down the road, and they're too far down the road. And these are things that can really throw them astray. So before we go in, because before we jump off today, I want to make sure we go through some of the key takeaways in your course and your books and the other things that you offer. There are just a plethora of people out there now that talk about buying businesses for no money down. In your experience, have you seen this work at any sort of scale or fashion?
They're completely full of shit. That's my answer to you. Sorry to be so blunt, but that's the reality. That's reality. I like to think, and I know we've had a couple conversations. You're the same way. We both breathe oxygen from this planet. That is not the real world. Does it happen? Yeah, 1 out of 10,000, maybe 1 out of 100,000. Is it possible? Yes, in those numbers, if at all. Could you buy a garbage business for no money down? Of course. Who wants that? But even it makes my blood boil when I hear these self-appointed gurus.
Yep.
Selling this. I think it's delusion, and I think it's misleading, and I believe that they're preying on people at their most vulnerable time, not emotionally vulnerable, but they're at a point in their lives where they really want to change
their life.
They want to change their life, and they got hopes and they got dreams, and they really want to do this in a good way. And very often they're surrounded by people who are naysayers, and they want to forge ahead. And then you have all these people that are preying on them and charging them thousands and thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. And it's so ridiculous. Like one of these concepts of buying distressed businesses for no money down. Well, think about it this way. If it's distressed, right, there's a reason why that happened. And if it's distressed and you need to generate an income, how's that going to happen? And if it's distressed, you could rest assured on day one, you have to put money into that business.
Yes.
So even this concept, no money down, it's grossly misleading. The biggest part of this is as follows. You are not going to buy a good business for no money down repeatedly. Could it happen once out of 1,000, 10,000, or 100,000 times? Yes. I'm doing this for 34 years. I did it once. And that was because it was a competitor of mine. We amalgamated. Other than that, you are not going to buy a good business with no money down. If I believed that was possible, instead of 100,000 courses, I probably would have sold 10 million, but I would never do that to people because it's not the way I operate. And now I don't know about you, but like I'm only on Instagram, or was on Instagram, because my son played junior hockey in Massachusetts. So I used to follow some of the local hockey or whatever. And all of a sudden, like my phone's blowing up with these ads from these people selling these courses and boot camps and mastermind groups and the inner circle and all these wonderful things for $1,000, $5,000, $25,000 about buying a business. And it's everywhere. And now they have these fancy words like entrepreneurship through acquisition and searchers and all this wonderful stuff. And it makes my blood boil because it's just so misleading. You can buy a good business all day long with great deal terms, but you're not doing it for zero money down. I help teach people how to do that, but it's not happening with zero money down and of any consequence. So I'm glad you brought that up because I think people are just getting severely taken advantage of, and it just really just drives me bonkers.
Yeah. Yeah. And rightly so, because it is preying on people at a time when they're trying to change their lives, and it's not right. But I want to just say real quick, Harry says, thanks for your honesty, Richard. He's enjoyed it. That's good.
My pleasure.
Good guy. And he said, cheap things aren't good and good things aren't cheap. And
amen to that. And I'm glad he pointed out what good, because I've always been a proponent. You buy a good business. You don't look to buy a great business. You buy a good business that you can build over time, a good, solid, business that can grow with you as the owner. I'm a strong proponent of what's really important is you want to buy a good business that's going to, all things being equal, will sustain itself when you take over, because there is a learning curve and sometimes there's a bit of a dip. And so, great businesses you end up having to overpay for, and they're at the top of the heap, and there's only one way typically that they can go. So you get it right in the middle, like, at the bottom of the heap, you got garbage, in the middle, you got good, and then the top of the heap, you got great. So you buy a good, solid business. I'm glad Harry mentioned the points to use the words good, because I think that's, where people have to, direct themselves. You just want something rock solid, good, that's going to transition well to you as a new owner.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've found that when we're buying business for our clients, we're typically going to be buying, either vertically, trying to help integrate a supplier that's fairly similar so they understand what's going on, or we're going to be doing it horizontally, where we're getting geographical footprint by doing what we do. And when you're doing that, buying a good business, especially if you're going horizontally and just increasing geographic footprint or something, like, say I'm a plumber and I want to buy the plumber down the street from me. You really can, I think it's a triple win. Really. It's a win for the seller, because if you and I are across town and we're good business people, that business is staying in town.
Yes.
That's one of the things. Those employees are going to stay paid, right? They're going to keep the jobs, so the community wins, the seller wins because they can leave a legacy they can stand up and be proud of, and the buyer wins because when we know each other, doesn't mean we're not going to do unfavorable terms one way or the other, but there's a lot more latitude we have to really talk about what is best for the business going forward as a whole. You, someone selling me business, and me as the buyer doing it with full transparency in what we want to do, it really works out well.
It does. And one of the points you bring up, something it's almost magical, this whole equation, when you paint the picture of, I see two plumbers walking down Main Street figuring out how they're going to sit, one buys the other one's business. And so there's a lot of that wonder to the whole transaction. But most important is, what you've identified is when people go into this equation as a buyer, buyers that go into this like a bull in a china shop usually rarely do a deal.
Yep.
When you go into this, and you first and foremost want to make sure, like the negotiation piece, which usually flips people out and they do it the wrong way, is you want to have a thoughtful, meaningful conversation with the owner, because the way this starts off is the owner, has a lot of emotion tied to this transaction. It's a piece of themselves that's disappearing. Most of them don't even know what the heck they're going to do after they sell the business.
Yeah.
But a part of their legacy is really disappearing. And when people come in guns a-blazing and point out all the things that they're doing wrong in their business in an effort to pound down the price, they're doing themselves a terrible disservice, because chances are the seller, they won't get any sense of comfort with this person to even run the business, let alone take care of the employees, if that's important to them. And it is important to some, not to all. For some, it's just the price and terms. But going in there and having meaningful, thoughtful conversations, getting to know each other, not drawing lines in the sand, not being a hard ass, not trying to win every battle. Like, I have I think it's 3 pages in the course of the do's and don'ts of negotiating. And very often people are stunned that a lot of them are emotionally related.
Yes.
versus saying, when they offer this, do that. Of course we go into that, but it's looking at this like from a much more, um, a much from a 30,000 foot view of how you should be approaching this from a philosophical perspective and an attitude perspective. And I've seen it on the side as being a representative of a seller. Someone comes in and they start knocking the seller. They throw them. They have no idea. They have no desire to do business with that individual. And I'm sure you've seen it all the time when a buyer and seller like each other and they trust each other, and one wants to buy and one wants to sell. You can't stop them from getting a deal done. And even times when the seller thought, I need this, I'm going to sell it for X, and they'll take X less just based on the personality. It happens far more often than people would believe. So, the example that you painted, the small town plumbers typically, right? Or, guys in HVAC or electricians, that type of conversation, a good back and forth and getting to know each other. Then you can find you can work your way around almost every issue.
Yep. Yeah, I'm just listening, dude, because you're preaching to the choir here. I've seen it work both ways. And when you just sit down as the buyer of that organization and start talking with the person that wants to sell it, and what do you want to create with your legacy? What are you hoping to do by this? And then the buyer can take the turn. This is what I hope to achieve by doing this. And none of us are talking about price. None of us talking about terms.
No,
we're establishing a relationship based on do what you want to do and do what I want to do. Does that kind of match up?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's exactly it. And when that becomes aligned, and oftentimes it doesn't, but when it does become aligned, and you get to finding out that by conversation, not by saying, oh yeah, you know what, they're asking price, it's way, it's way above, I'm going to put in a low offer and I'm going to have to, you don't even go there yet. Like, have the conversation, because all of that stuff, you'll deal with it at the appropriate time.
Yes.
It's going to be dealt with. But at the beginning, good conversation, not fake conversation. I mean, you really want to have the agenda. I want to get to know this person. I want to understand how they think, because when I'm a buyer, I look at it and say, when I understand how they think, I'll get a real good insight to how they run their business, how they treat people, how they deal with a difficult point. Are they, if I say something difficult, do they immediately throw a left hook, or they take a step back and they process what I said? Because the latter example, you recognize that they're not going to just, go nuts on employees, that they're going to let people by and large do what they have to do, that people will make mistakes and they're not going to chop them off at the knees. So, all those type of things, if you're observant, and the more you do this, the better you get, those things will come to the surface very quickly. And it makes the whole process nicer. Can't be done all the time. Sometimes you have some hard-headed, egotistical maniacs, and it can't be done. But most of the time it can be.
Yeah. And as I mentioned before, with the ones that we've been doing with our clients, it's been that way. And really, our clients are in the industry already. It's just more of that. And I know if you're a deal person, it seems like it's slow. And why are we just sitting here talking about what we want to do? But as you said, those conversations give you so much information, and then they give you that indication of, how is this deal going to go? Do we even want to go any further? Because if we don't align, if we're north and the other person's east or west, I mean, we might want to say, well, this is awesome, but Richard, it's not going to work for us right now. And that's cool.
Yeah. And that's cool too, right? I have a webinar that I'm doing tomorrow with a bunch of business buyers, and talking about one of the points that I have on there is, very often they go into these meetings, and they're at very early stage, they're asking about the financials, they're asking about the competition, they're asking about the industry, they're asking about the employees, they're asking about the suppliers, they're asking about the contracts, the leases, and saying, ladies and gentlemen, those are all great questions, but they're all coming at the wrong time.
Yeah.
Like, you got plenty of time to address those at the appropriate time. Early on, we want to have a conversation like you and I are having.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it just establishes so much by doing that conversation, that you will get to the value conversation, the terms conversation, the operational conversations, but those are later down the road, because you got to really understand what you're trying to do first.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
So as you're creating your course, you create the course and you're going through these things. What are some of the key takeaways that you hope that people that go through your course and your materials and are really studying what you're teaching hope to find out? If there are 2 or 3 main points that they, or 5 or whatever your number is, but what are some of the main points these business buyers really should concentrate on, or will learn as going through your stuff?
Well, I think at the first, at a high level, I would say that it's doable by anybody. That's really
Good point.
important. I think that
Yep.
people should understand that this is doable by anybody. It really is. Additional points that are really high level important points without getting into the weeds is understanding that we have 23 chapters, because that's what the buying process is, from chapter 1 of considerations that you have to do, and there's family considerations and what have you, straight to post-purchase priorities. Those are, and everything in between. So
Nice.
those are the 23 chapters. But one of the things that I tell people is the single most important thing that you could do is you got to get the business right. And the business not the right business. It's got to be, you have to be right for the business, because a good business run by the wrong person will go out of business pretty quick. It's not like a building you overpay. It'll still be standing in a year as long as you service the debt, business will be gone. And so the single most important thing that you have to do is you have to get in tune with your greatest skill set, because that has to match the business. And if you do an average job on the 22 other chapters, but you do a terrific job, a flawless job on chapter number 3, the right business for you, and identifying that, chances are you're going to be successful. Now, if you do it the other way around, you got everything else right, but you buy the wrong business, you're going to go out of business. And so that's really important, the right business. A couple of other things is, sorry, go ahead. You had a question. You look like
I'm just saying that is one of the things whenever I actually talk to a business buyer and they say, well, we'd like to have you help us find a business. I said, no, I don't really think that's something that's good for you to try to pay somebody, because the business that you're going to find for you, the right business for you, is going to be as hard as finding a spouse. And
or harder.
Yeah, or harder. Yeah. Just because of the difficulty in doing that. And this is another
great example.
I wanted to make sure we talked about this just briefly, because there's a lot of people will tell you pay us money, we'll find you a business to buy. And
Nonsense.
I think that's total farce.
Nonsense. Total farce. They'll find you a business, but it's not the right business for you to buy. If you want to pay me $10,000 like some of these search firms to get you some businesses, I mean, I wouldn't take anybody's money to do that, but there are people who will take that and they'll say, well, here's a list of 25 businesses that are willing to sell. But you have to drill down into what's right for you. And you're right. I can't go out and find you a wife. I mean, there's certain countries, there's arranged marriages, so maybe it'll be a little easier. But here in America, right? Yeah. I mean, for the most part, we don't do that. And the identification of what business is right for the individual is everything. So that's clearly a high level, very important thing. Other things related to like valuation, for example, valuations, sellers typically overvalue the business because they have what it's worth to them. Buyers need to get comfortable with financials and understand they need to compile a defensible valuation. I tell people never pay attention to the asking price. It's completely irrelevant to me. Because it shouldn't influence. At some point, you may want to think about it from a standpoint, how are they thinking about this business? But for the most part, I pay no attention whatsoever to the asking price. You have to come up, it should never influence your decision. You have to come up with your own solid valuation that's defensible. We've identified over the years 50 fundamentals that go into a valuation. So we do it in a different way. We put the financials together and the adjusted numbers, and then we have like a 50-point questionnaire that people answer related to the fundamentals of the business, such as, including deal terms, but customer concentration, any key employees, the barriers to entry, a lot of uncommon ones, which are the condition of the financials, the inventory being good and resellable. Can any of the employees leave and quickly go into business? You rely, how steep is your learning curve? Those type of things. And then we marry that with the number and come up with a multiple. So then there's the valuation piece. It's got to be defensible. So you have those 3 so far. Another point, we talked about negotiation, then related to the due diligence. People need to understand that the due diligence on a business begins the second you find a business that's of interest to you.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes a good business is going to sell quickly, and you have to start doing your homework and your research immediately. In the internet, if you conduct yourself in a good way, you can get good research. You could you can go off the reservation pretty quickly too, but you
Yeah.
could do it in a very good way. And because what you want to do is, when you get to the formalized due diligence phase, you want that to be confirmatory. You don't want it to be
Yep.
exploratory. You want to just confirm what you've learned to this point.
Yep.
You won't even have enough time to explore it.
You do not.
So you've got to do that very early. So those are really four things that are really critically important, and the right business, of course, and people as a drop down to that. And I'm actually doing a session tomorrow for a bunch of business buyers, talking about the right business and deal flow and how to go about it, because most people go about it the complete ass backward way. Right? They get online, they start looking at all kinds of business, figuring which one, if any, is going to be right for them, and it's the wrong way. First, you have to figure out which one's right, and then it's so damn easy to find and buy it. I mean, it's really easy. People don't realize how easy it is. It's just, if you're, it's like if you're going hunting. I'm not a hunter. I'm a fisherman a little bit, but if you're going hunting, you want to take someone who's savvy about where you're going hunting and knows where your prey is, right? Compare and contrast that, like going hunting with Stevie Wonder, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, it just doesn't make sense. So people go about this whole process in such an ass backward way. That's why I really, it's very gratifying when we get people settled away. One of the things that when I talk about, a lot of people that have been looking at for a long time, and tell them, you got to forget first of all, if you forget everything you've thought about this, you got to be open-minded, and don't confuse your education with knowledge.
Yeah.
And we're seeing more and more of that. So, it's
Yeah.
just, there's a good way to go about doing that. Those are the big level ones, though, that I would identify.
And that it just shows, I mean, your experience just shines through in this. Getting the right business for you. I mean, that is the biggest thing, I think. And then the other thing you said, that was, you got to start due diligence quickly. It's got to be, all the way up to the offer, but you got to, your formal due diligence really is about confirmation. It's not about finding problems. You may find a problem there, but any big ones should have been done before you even got an offer out there. And
Exactly.
that's what I think a lot of people waste their time in that they may throw an offer before they do any diligence at all. And that's a waste of time for everyone, because there's a lot of red flags you can hit pretty quick. I'm sure your materials cover that, and I'm not going to get into that too deep, but it's awesome talking to you today, Richard. And our time went so quickly.
That's it. Wow. Okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. I mean,
That's great.
it's like, boom, it goes, because
great. Fun conversation. Thank you.
It's just your experience and really teaching people about buying a business the right way. And I want people, if you're listening now and you didn't listen from this beginning, go back to the beginning, listen to what Richard said, and just take heed to what he's saying. And then if they want to see more about your course materials and all the other stuff, what's your website? How can they reach out to you, Richard? What's the best way?
It's pretty easy. Go to richardparker.com. We have hundreds of free articles, free reports. The course is there. I think it's richardparker.com/course, but go to richardparker.com. There's plenty of information to keep you very busy for a long time, and great articles and helpful articles. And if anybody wants to get a hold of me, just send a message through the contact us page and make sure they ask them to direct it to me. And I'm happy to get on a call or email with anybody, and happy to answer anybody's questions.
Awesome. Well, I was excited for this when we first started talking about it, Richard, and I'm even more pleased now that we've been able to get on here and share what you're helping people do, buying a business the right way. And thanks for all you do, helping everybody, and thanks for stopping by with us today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me. I was very excited for this conversation. We spoke briefly before, and I know you have the sell and the broker pedigree behind you, so I knew it'd be a real fun conversation. And so again, I really appreciate you having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. Well, I just want to say thanks everybody for being here today. Those of you that didn't leave comments, we want to make sure to recognize you out there listening. I can see we had a lot of people on today. I want to thank Harry once again for stopping by and dropping a comment in there. I want to thank everybody. We got some comments over there on Instagram as well. Thank you for those. We will be back again next week. Have a great weekend, everyone. Richard, hang out for a moment and we'll end up here.